Well, the consultant that we went to see told us brutally and very bluntly that Lisa had cystic fibrosis, that it was an incurable disease, and that we were not to expect her to have a very long life at all. We were absolutely stunned and numb. They must have got it all wrong. It couldn't possibly happen to you. These kind of things happen to other people and not you. And really, we just went home, because Mother was with me, and we just sat down and cried. We didn't know what else to do.
Lisa Edmunds died earlier this year. She was just 16, but according to new medical evidence, she should have lived longer.
We didn't get the benefit of everything that was available, and that if we'd had the benefit of all the treatment and all the drugs and everything else that was available, then she wouldn't have died at the time that she did.
Last week, doctors announced they were close to discovering the cause of cystic fibrosis, one of the most terrible and little understood of children's diseases. But tonight, World in Action looks at another disturbing side of the illness, the treatment. New evidence to be published shortly by the British Paediatric Association says many children die years before they need to. And we tell the story of Lisa Edmunds, who died when she might have lived. Like most victims, even today, Lisa didn't get the best treatment until it was too late.
You're talking about your little girl's life. If in those early years she'd had the correct treatment, then she would most probably still have been alive and with us now. And the terrible irony of it is the fact that even today, you're still getting the same situation in certain areas of the country where people don't know so much about it. Children aren't receiving the proper treatment, and children are still dying when really they needn't be dying.
Today, months after the death of their only child, Yorkshire farmer David Edmunds and his wife Margaret are slowly rebuilding their life, a life shattered when they were told Lisa was suffering from an illness they'd never heard of, cystic fibrosis. In fact, it's the most common inherited disease in Britain. Even in this restaurant, there'll be several other carriers besides Lisa's parents. In Britain, there are 3 million. There's no way of detecting it, but it doesn't do them any harm until, like Margaret and David Edmunds, one carrier marries another. Then there's a 1 in 4 chance that any child will have cystic fibrosis.
When she was born, she was such a lovely, healthy baby. And then, from about 18 months old, she started to get very thin, just as though we weren't feeding her, you know, looking very frail and thin. And every doctor, every time we sort of asked the doctor, at first it was, oh, well, you know, just one of these things kids get. And then, of course, he got concerned. And luckily, he picked up on it because he kept after it until he found out what it was. And then when we found out that it was cystic, we were horrified.
There are up to 10,000 such victims in Britain. Although they look healthy, the disease means internally, the body's normal secretions are much thicker than they should be. This blocks the digestive system and, much more seriously, the lungs. They become clogged up, infected, damaged, and eventually destroyed.
You try to convince yourself that it can't possibly be what they've said, that, you know, she couldn't look quite so good as she did, and that perhaps if you don't think about it too much, it might just go away and things will turn out all right in the end, or they might discover they've made a big mistake.
You make plans like every father does for his children. You work hard for them. You think when they grow up, you're going to make their life a lot easier. I said when I first saw when she was born that, you know, to Margaret, she would never have to work the way that I've had to work. And of course, to suddenly find out that she's a fair good chance of not being there when she's grown up, obviously it hits you very hard.
When Lisa was born in 1969, most doctors thought cystic fibrosis untreatable. They gave some antibiotics, a little physiotherapy. But as with Lisa, it was done without any real hope. As she grew older, the damage to her lungs was seen as inevitable. Nobody expected her to survive.
Whenever she had a cold, it was a lot worse than other children's colds or anybody else's colds.
affected her more, and she was often taken to her bed with just an ordinary cold because it was so bad. And we noticed that her chest seemed to get worse and worse each time she had one of these infections.
Our GP was, very helpful and always came up with antibiotics that we could try to help to ease the situation and to help with the phlegm build-up on her chest. We began to do what was then called tipping and tapping. We used to lay Lisa down and pat her so that the phlegm would come away and she would cough it up and get rid of it.
She would be continually coughing, and she would be up at night time and have very bad nights, broken nights. We used to have to sit up and read for hours on end so that she could sit up in bed instead of laying down because, it's the phlegm seemed to catch up on her chest and so forth. And, she was just really quite a poorly girl.
Our GP was, very helpful, but we felt that other people that we'd met had given up and felt that there wasn't very much that they could do, and that they didn't really see any point in trying after that. Everybody has said for a long time that cystic fibrosis is an incurable disease, and they seem to just accept that.
During those years, Lisa was being treated at a local hospital, as most children still are today. But in the late 70s, when she was becoming very ill, a few hospitals had already begun to specialise in the disease. The nearest was in Leeds, 60 miles away. Here, paediatrician Jim Littlewood had begged and borrowed resources to build up a team which was challenging old attitudes and tackling the disease in a much more positive way. He'd become concerned about treatment years before.
Yes. The majority of patients were getting antibiotics and physiotherapy and vitamins, but I think the therapy was not as hard. And we keep using this word aggressive. I mean, hope that's taken the right way. It means treating them very forcefully, giving the very best drugs in the best doses, giving the best nebulizers, the best technique of physiotherapy. Really hitting the disease as hard as it is possible to do.
Lisa's parents heard about the Leeds Centre and wanted to take her there, but local doctors said it would take a long time. After waiting 18 months, with Lisa getting steadily worse, the family contacted the centre themselves, cutting across local doctors.
We had to carry her because she couldn't walk. Her chest was so full of stuff we hadn't been able to shift it, and we carried her up and then went up to see them and started to talk to Dr. Littlewood. And he said, if you come and stay with me for 3 weeks, then, I can make you better. And she said to him, well, I've been better and it's not, there's not much to it really. I feel the same now, so it isn't going to make a lot of difference really. So he said to her, well, the thing is, if you come and stay with me for 3 weeks, I can promise you that you'll be able to run when you go out of here. And really she didn't believe him at all, I think. It took her all the time to walk, never mind run. We sort of sat and looked at him in disbelief, and she said to him, well, I don't believe what you're saying, but I'll have a go because I haven't tried it before, and she wasn't one for giving up. And so we settled ourselves in there and went through a lot of agonies and various things. But in that 3 weeks, we were just astonished at the difference in her. She put on a stone in weight, which was quite phenomenal. And when we left, she could run. And after that, she just couldn't have confidence in anybody but Dr. Littlewood. She always used to call him Uncle Jim behind his back. I don't think he ever knew.
There's not very much there, is there, really? It's very green, though.
Dr. Littlewood was able to treat Lisa with intense and specialised therapy beyond anything her local hospital could do.
Big breath in. Good, let out. Good. Keep going, a bit more.
Children here are monitored closely for the first signs of decline, especially in the lungs. Mucus samples reveal the slightest lung infection, which is treated at once. Tests like this showed Lisa's lungs were already badly damaged, but Dr. Littlewood's clinic was still able to help her. There's nothing really new about the treatment, it's just a tougher, more rigorous routine. They give up to 4 times as much physiotherapy here and get parents to do more besides. For everyone involved, it's a demanding regime, and for the child, sometimes a painful and stressful one, particularly as the treatment centres on large doses of drugs given intravenously. Small children can be attached to drips for days at a time.
The most important area of treatment in cystic fibrosis is the use of antibiotics. First of all, giving very high doses of drugs and ensuring that the doses were in fact correct by checking levels in the blood and getting the right frequency of administration, giving them intravenously and giving them under close supervision for longer periods of time, perhaps 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even longer, until the patient stopped improving, basically.
It's this determination to fight the disease that makes the new centre so different from most local hospitals, where the majority of children are still being treated.
We know in our heart of hearts that cystic fibrosis is not treatable, but our approach is that it's a treatable condition. And therefore, we go all out in the effort to treat it and keep the patients as well as possible and keep them normal. And that means that we perhaps treat the patients a little bit earlier than other hospitals might. If our aim is to keep the child normal, we're willing to sacrifice a little bit more of their lives to coming into hospital, knowing that we can keep them alive better and for longer. Nobody likes coming into hospital, and parents don't like having their children in hospital. But because the reward for bringing them in is worthwhile, then we bring them in.
When Lisa came out and she could run and do all the things that she wanted to do, Lisa had always loved the horses. And in that time, she was so well that we were able to buy her a pony. She had some lovely days and lovely memories to think about. And it was so lovely to see her doing all the things that everybody else's children just take for granted. And she just didn't have the energy to do those things before.
Yeah.
Centres like this are confident that, unlike Lisa, 90% of their patients will now survive into their 20s with virtually undamaged lungs. Until recently, less than half lived that long. Yet, however impressive the claims, many paediatricians remain unconvinced. They say treatment has improved everywhere and all patients are living longer. They question, too, the substantial cost. Dr. Littlewood's clinic alone takes 1/3 of the hospital's entire antibiotics budget. Some doctors say there's no real evidence that the treatment makes much difference. Most patients will die anyway, and the money could be better spent elsewhere.
I personally don't feel that I should be considering what is happening to, say, geriatrics or orthopedics. That is for the administrators, for the region, for the DHSS to worry about. I'm not saying we don't worry about the cost, but our job is to deliver the best possible treatment within reason. And we regard this within reason.
You were all obviously much happier with the treatment Lisa received at the Leeds Centre, but in the end she still died. It wasn't enough to save her life.
No. We had tremendous burst of energy to start with, but gradually, because the lung damage was there before we started this treatment, the periods of her being better were becoming less and less time in between, and we found that whereas to begin with we would go for 6 months and then have to have a fortnight or 3 weeks in hospital, then it gradually went down to 4 months and then 2 months, and then finally we were just there all the time. We couldn't seem to get anything that would stop this bug that was there.
When Lisa came to us, in common with a lot of teenagers of that time, she had really quite badly infected lungs, and we were able, by giving a very heavy therapy really with intravenous antibiotics and inpatient treatment, big doses, we were able to improve her for a number of years. But it is usually the experience that if the lungs are badly damaged, you do get less effect from the treatments as the years go by.
Yet there were no hard facts to support the centres until this man came along, paediatrician Edmund Hay. But until last year, he too shared all the doubts about the centres, doubts strengthened when he found himself working in one in Australia.
The very first clinic I started at 9 o'clock in the morning, and a child came in with his parents. And after a few minutes, I realised that they'd had to get up at 5 in the morning to make a 250-mile journey to see me. They'd see me for 10 minutes, have a quick word with the physiotherapist, and then have to make another 250-mile journey back to Mildura before they could milk the cows. And it didn't seem to me that that was probably ideal medicine, that the patients had to come so far to find the expertise.
Dr. Hay decided to compare the British treatment he favoured, care in small local hospitals, with that in Australia. The results, published recently, were not what he expected.
Well, I was shocked by what I found, because it became clear that children were dying twice as often in this country as they were in Australia. And this was true whether we looked at young children in the first year or two of life, or we looked at young school children, or we looked at adolescents. On each occasion, the death rate and the misery and the long-term chronic illness that went for months, if not years, before death, was being found twice as often amongst children with cystic fibrosis in this country as in Australia.
Dr. Hay's findings came as unwelcome news to the British Paediatric Association. They'd already set up a working party on the disease, but now awaited its report with growing concern. That report, which will be sent to every paediatrician in the country during the next few weeks, finally shatters any complacency about treatment. It confirms that children cared for in centres live longer than those treated locally. It says there should be more centres, and they should coordinate the treatment for all children with the disease.
I think patients living in a big conurbation, such as Leeds or somewhere like that, it is reasonable for them all to attend one clinic. It does not seem right to me to have one or two scattered about in various clinics. But for patients outside Leeds, I think they should be notified to the centre, and they should probably be seen once every year or 18 months, depending on their condition.
If we had had the opportunity and the availability of the regional centre, then she would have probably enjoyed a better quality of life in the life that she had.
Your local doctor hasn't a chance of being, you know, the same pitch on that disease as a guy who's specialised in it for the last 10 years. You can't expect him to have.
What difference do you think it would have made to Lisa had she had the benefit of the Leeds clinic maybe 5 or 6 years earlier?
I think she'd probably still be here today. Certainly.
Do you think that children are still dying unnecessarily in this country because of inadequate treatment?
I think looking at the recent figures from the British Paediatric Association survey, that must be the case, in that survival is better in the big centres than in the small centres. I think the problem is knowing at whereabouts it is the treatment's failing these children, and we feel that it's probably early on in treatment. It's in the first 5-6 years of life. In what perhaps some doctors don't realise is the importance of keeping the children well, stopping the first bit of lung damage to be able to keep the lungs normal for as long as possible.
It's a view shared by the Cystic Fibrosis Trust. They want the centres to monitor the health of all victims. But, they point out, the attitude of parents is sometimes a problem.
People say, oh, I was a little guy, and say, oh, you know, she's got cystic fibrosis. And they say, oh, what's that, you know? She looks all right. What does it do? Will she grow out of it? And of course she won't. And people don't realise how serious it is, including you yourself. There's a lot of internal damage which you don't know about in the early stages. And of course, you think the same way, you know, the doctors are maybe exaggerating a bit. She seems fine, you know, fine, healthy kid. And on you go merrily.
One of the big problems with cystic fibrosis, it's a very mild disease in the early stages, and it's very difficult to persuade parents without frightening them away from a big centre that their children have in fact got a serious disease, that although they look normal now, they've got at high risk of developing a grumbling chest infection that's going to cause them damage, and that eventually they may die from their condition or that it's in fact very likely that they will die from their condition.
The Cystic Fibrosis Trust also recognise another problem. Some doctors will still be reluctant to refer patients to the centres. They advise parents, if necessary, to insist.
The patient has a right to change his family doctor. The family doctor can refer to any consultant in the country, and he's a right to change the consultant he refers to. And I think if the parents are really keen that this should happen, and they feel that this would improve matters, I mean, they have a right to change the doctors that they are in fact being treated by.
If you upset people in this world, they'll get over it, but a child might not. And, you know, if their feelings are hurt, and if I hurt their feelings when I did just that, then I'm sorry, but, you know, I wanted what's best for Lisa, and that was what I intended to get.
Most doctors, though, now agree that the centres are urgently needed. But one final problem remains. Support and financial backing still has to be won from the government.
Well, I don't think we can achieve what these children deserve unless there are centres. It doesn't mean that the child has to have all his care in a centre, but he needs to be in touch with the centre.
And what would your reaction be if the DHSS said it couldn't afford to set these centres up?
The DHSS always says that it can't afford anything new. Something else will have to give, is the answer.
If we are told by the administration, in the broadest sense of the word, that we cannot afford to give what is considered to be reasonable treatment in the States, in Copenhagen, in Australia, well then we will have to, all right, we won't give it, but it's very important the public know that we can't afford to give it.
Well, I think it would be monstrous if we didn't set up centres now. Now we've really recognised that we're giving second-rate care to some of these children. We can't not offer children the chance to reach a happy adult life.
But of course it's a dreadful thing when you see them fading away in front of your eyes. Obviously they never see it, you never let them see it, but that takes some living with, obviously. But what's your choice? You just do your best for them and you try and make sure that, you know, you've done your bit and hope that they pull round. A lot of them do. That's the odds, you know, you can't do anything about that.
Towards the end of her life, Lisa was given the treatment that is today keeping girls of her age fit and well. But they've benefited from it all their lives. For Lisa, as she knew herself, it came too late.
Christmas was coming up, and Lisa said that she wanted to go home. She had decided then that that was it. She didn't want to go through any more, and she didn't want any more drips, and she didn't want any more operations or needles or drugs or anything. She just wanted to come home and be at home for Christmas. And so that was what we did. 2 weeks before Christmas, or no, I think it was only a week before Christmas, we packed all our things into the car and came home. We tried to enjoy the Christmas as best we could, and the family came and helped her, but she couldn't walk, and we had to carry her up and down stairs to go to bed. And then after Christmas, she just deteriorated more and more and took to her bed finally all the time. She didn't want to get up.
Doctors are confident they'll soon understand the cause of cystic fibrosis. This will make possible a test to detect carriers and perhaps much better treatment. Until then, unless care is improved for all children, victims of the disease will continue to die years before they should.
She just gradually deteriorated, and she said she wouldn't go back to hospital anymore. And they were tremendous support to us whilst we had her at home. She said she didn't want to go back to hospital. She wanted to be with her family. And she was so breathless, her chest was full of mucus, and she couldn't lay down because she couldn't breathe, and she couldn't sit up because she couldn't breathe. And I sat with her for hours on end, and she used to prop herself up against me, and she just, you know, found it so difficult to breathe that it was just awful. And finally she just slipped into a coma and just went to sleep.